You're listening to The Interactome, a podcast by a group of young researchers who want to connect you to the world of science by sharing their stories and perspectives. Just in case their bosses are listening, they want to remind you that the opinions expressed here are their own. They also want to remind you not to take anything they say as medical or professional advice, as they are not doctors. Not yet, anyway. Stay tuned about that. And, without further ado, welcome to the Interactome.
So for today's episode, we're going to be talking about fish. We're going to talk about fishing, fisheries, and sea creatures, which I think is a fun departure from what we've talked about in the past. And I invited today's guest. Along with me from the Interactome crew are Maia.
Hello.
And Sarah.
Hello.
Hopefully at this point you know us, but if you don't, I'm, like I said, Sam. I'm a biochemistry graduate student.
Oh, and I'm Maia. I am a molecular and cell biology graduate student.
And I'm Sarah. I'm going to be a medical student in about a month.
Woo! That's exciting.
Crazy.
And you have left us all and run off to another part of the country. Well, you've left
Oh my God.
Group of us that are back in Massachusetts.
Sounds so dramatic. But no, now Interactome Media is like coast to coast. We have East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast. So.
Yep. Just it's exciting. And today with us is a old friend of ours from, I should say Maia and myself from high school, actually, who is a marine biologist. So you have with us Jess Veo.
Hi, thank you for having me.
If you'd like to introduce yourself, give the audience a little bit more about yourself because this is your first time on here.
Yeah, my name is Jess. I kind of describe myself as an early career marine scientist. I have a lot of experience working with marine mammals in a lot of different contexts. I've studied them by taking photos of them. I've studied audio recordings of them. I've done a lot of necropsies, which are animal autopsies. And I have also worked in marine mammal stranding. So I have a big background in marine mammal research. I have a smaller background in fisheries research. I've done a few different projects putting cameras on gill nets to document how seals interact with them. And I've worked as a technician for the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries as a diadromous fisheries technician. So I've got a little bit of experience in each part of what we're going to be talking about today, which probably makes me a good person to talk about it. And I have some outreach and education experience. I spent some time as a park ranger doing education, and I currently work for a girls' science camp.
So cool. And yeah, Jess, I guess like for more context, it would be cool to give us a little bit about like how you got interested in marine biology and fisheries science. That would be really interesting.
I have always been an animal lover, always been a nerd from the beginning, like us all, I'm assuming. I've loved animals and nature from a very young age. And not only did I love going outside and experiencing it myself, like I remember very vividly consuming a lot of like Animal Planet TV shows as a kid that really inspired me, and I got to see so many cool places that I was like, I need to go there. And so I always loved animals when I was a kid. Like a lot of animal lovers, I wanted to be a veterinarian, which did not pan out, but I'm very happy with my career choices. And actually, it's kind of funny. When I was a kid, I would watch this show called Whale Wars, which was about the Sea Shepherds, which is an organization that is trying to stop Japanese whaling in the Antarctic. And I remember watching that and being so mad and I was furious. Like I was just this righteous little probably 12-year-old that was like, how could they do this? And I remember being like, I want to do something. Like, I want to stop that. And that truly, it's kind of silly, but that TV show made me consider, like, do I want to be a marine biologist? And I kind of never let it go. So I'm living a lot of, like, 12-year-old fantasies right now.
I dimly remember that show.
It sounds intense. And I think 12-year-old you would probably be very proud of where you are right now.
I know. I think about that. It's kind of sweet. I think about that sometimes. I'm like, wow, I don't think she'd believe where I've gotten.
You're doing...
Isn't that like the nerd goal, though, to like get where your 12-year-old self
Yes.
wants to be?
Exactly.
Yes.
Like,
that's what all nerds want.
So, Jess, I have a question for you just to kick us off.
Yeah.
If you want to talk more about what exactly a fishery is, because I think, as an American consumer, I've definitely eaten a lot of fish, but, do I know where they come from all the time? Not really. And I think it'd be cool to talk about. So, can you give us a quick background on what exactly a fishery is and why that's so important to the average person?
Yeah, so very broadly, a fishery this is like the definition, is an operation or industry of catching fish and other marine species, not just fish, like lobster, crabs, or shrimp, and selling it. So it's directly economic in a way. It's a fish stock or like a fish population is not necessarily a fishery. It has to be a economically viable business in a way. So if you've eaten seafood, you've encountered a fishery. We have fisheries here in the United States. If you live in a coastal area, you have probably fisheries around you. Even if you live in a region that sells fish from lakes, that's considered a fishery. And there's international fisheries that can be much, much bigger in scale than a local small scale.
yeah. There's a lot of economic activity in the form of big boats and, people doing a hard job.
And a dangerous job. It can be a very, very dangerous job, and very difficult, which is why seafood can be so expensive. It's not easy at all.
I remember one summer I was going sailing and I was reading the news, and like a couple weeks earlier, a fishing boat had actually sank right near where we were sailing. Yeah, I don't think I think it was relatively, I don't think anyone was seriously injured, but the boat was, I think we sailed right over the boat. It's like, it was a little alarming. I was like, oh my gosh. I'd probably seen the boat before. It was not a small vessel, but, it's a risky business being out on the water. Which, if you're ever around it enough, you learn that, water's not something to mess with.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember growing up, my brothers and I think this is a program on Discovery, but I'm not sure, but maybe you guys have heard of Deadliest Catch for lobstering. And I was always so stressed when watching that because it's like you were saying, Sam, the water is dangerous. The lobster cages are huge and heavy. And I'm oh wow, it's really intense.
Aren't they actually fishing Alaskan king crab?
I think it's crab.
I was it was some
but we
lobster
do in
crab.
Massachusetts. We do have a fisheries show. I think it's Wicked Tuna.
Oh.
And that's a lot of them are out of Gloucester. So there is one local to us or to me.
I got buzzed by their helicopter doing that camp.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
I got buzzed by the Wicked Tuna helicopter, so you can kind of surmise where I was doing that. But yeah, which that's kind of freaky. Helicopters can be intense too, but yeah.
Yeah. And do you guys remember, this is a little mini throwback to high school, but I remember we had to read that book about lobsters and their secret lives. Do you guys remember? Or was that just my class? I don't remember.
I think that was just our biology class.
Okay,
Maya.
yeah. Because I remember there was a summer reading we had to do on the secret lives of lobsters, and it was this very detailed book about the biology of lobsters, and I think it got into a little bit about fisheries activities, if I remember. But yeah, it was really interesting. I learned so much about lobsters from that book.
Yeah. I just remember there was one chapter that was not listed on the summer reading. I didn't read it, but it was about the mating habits of lobsters. I don't know why.
I don't think high schoolers can handle that. I don't think we could have handled it.
I don't know. I don't think I actually read it, to be honest, which is a shame. Maybe there's like some saucy lobster.
Oh no.
I think we got into this a little bit, but so fisheries, there's a lot of like issues surrounding them, right? Like in terms of like we were talking about with both in terms of risk to people working in them, but also in terms of like how they're regulated and how they interact with animals, right? Like you were talking about with like to take it to, I guess, an absurd degree, like you were talking about with the whaling industry. But I think this is what you tend to focus on, right? So you want to go into more detail with that, or?
Yeah, so yeah, I have a lot of experience with how marine mammals interact with fisheries from my different research experiences. The first time I encountered it on my own was, well, I mean, truly the first time probably all of us encountered it as children. Have you guys heard of dolphin safe tuna? Does that ring a bell? Yeah. So I don't know exactly when, because it was before I think I was born. But they used to use dolphins as an indicator of where the tuna were to catch them. So when they saw dolphins, they would set nets and inevitably scoop up a bunch of dolphins and kill them, which is called bycatch. When you're catching something that's not your intended species. So there was a big like conservationist drive to have dolphin safe tuna, where you're not using the dolphins to, you know, indicate where the tuna are. So that's why, like, I think there's even some tuna companies that have a dolphin as their mascot, 'cause it's like, it's dolphin safe. So I think that's probably my first experience with marine mammal fishery interactions. But from a more professional standpoint, I was an intern at Shoals Marine Laboratory in 2018. It is a amazing institution that has undergraduate courses and internships, and it is located off the coast of southern Maine. And I was there taking photographs of seals. So there were seals that hauled out on a nearby island, and I took photographs of them to get population estimates and to gain more information on what was going on with the haul out. And one of the things we would see a lot were these things called entanglements. And entanglements is generally any anthropogenic, so human-made material that's wrapped around the body of an animal. And it can be any animal, but I mean, I'm focusing really on marine mammals. And for seals, we saw some different materials wrapped around. We saw one time we saw an aerobie frisbee. So it's a frisbee that's got a hole in the middle. And so we saw an aerobie frisbee around the neck of a seal, and it probably got caught around the neck of the seal when seal was younger and smaller, and then as it grew, the seal got bigger, but the frisbee did not, and so it begins to cut into the fur and into the skin and then into the blubber layer. So it creates these really nasty wounds. And though there were some odd materials and unknown materials that we weren't sure what they were, frisbee and then some other things, a lot of what we saw was netting, so fish nets. And a lot of it was monofilament netting, which is like a very thin, plasticky type of net that's super, super strong and durable. So that was kind of my first experience. And then I've moved on and did a lot of necropsies, and I got to do, which are animal autopsies, and I got to do necropsies of entangled seals. So I got to see how the entanglement killed the animal. And I was able to do necropsies of bicod seals. So I think I kind of brushed upon it, but so entanglement is the wrapping of human-made material around the body of an animal. Bycatch is the accidental catch of a non-target species. So if you are going out to catch shrimp in the Gulf of Mexico and you accidentally catch a bunch of random other fish, those other fish are your bycatch, because you weren't trying to catch them and you just throw them overboard. But, you were catching the shrimp, and those were just, the accidents that you accidentally killed. So it can be fish, it can be turtles. Turtles are like really, are affected by bycatch a lot, but it can also be marine mammals. So, and I don't know if I mentioned it either, but marine mammals include whales and dolphins. They include seals. True seals, which are the ones they have on the East Coast where I live, but also there's other types of seals called eared seals that are known as sea lions and fur seals. So fisheries can affect marine mammals in a lot of ways.
Jess, I had a quick question for you. So,
yeah,
from your experience and what you've seen, is bycatch or entanglement more common? Do you find that one kind of like happens more than the other, or is it like kind of the same?
I think it's a big question mark. We really don't know. So we have some data on bycatch because of a program called, everything I'm talking about is really New England, Gulf of Maine focused, because that's the only place that I've really worked, and that's where a lot of my experience comes from. But actually, everywhere where there's fisheries, there's typically an observer program, and in New England, it's called the Northeast Fisheries Observer Program. And these are scientists that go out on fishing boats and they record data on what's being caught. They measure the fish to make sure that everything's up to regulation. And they also will record data if a seal or other marine mammal or anything really, again, a turtle, anything is pulled up dead, is bycaught. So there is data from that, and there are fishermen that will report bycaught marine mammals if there's no observer around. There are fishermen that do that, but there probably are a lot that don't, because it's a big hassle. They have to do all this paperwork. It's probably a pain in the butt, and so this is a kind of a I don't know what the word is. We don't know this for certain, but there probably are some that will catch a seal, and it's dead, and they cut it out of the net, and they just throw it overboard, and it's like, no one saw. So, the numbers we have probably don't paint the whole picture. And with entanglements, we see a lot of entanglements where we monitor seals. So, at the Isles of Shoals, where I worked, every summer they have interns that take photos and monitor the seals. So we have a good idea of how many seals are entangled there, approximately. And there are people on Cape Cod that monitors the seals, on the haulouts on Cape Cod. There's some other islands in Maine that get monitored, but for the most part, there's a lot of spaces that aren't, we're not watching the seals, we're not looking at them, we're not taking their photographs. So a lot more could be entangled. It would be hard for me to say what happens more commonly, because we also don't really know how it even happens, both entanglement and bycatch. We don't know if entanglement happens because there's some ghost gear in the water and they play with it and then it gets caught around their necks, or if they're interacting with actively fishing gear and then breaking out of it because they're strong enough too. So it's really hard to say, but they're both major issues in terms of causing mortality in marine mammals.
So I have a couple of questions from that. So first off, you talk about like if it gets are there a lot of bycaught animals that are bycaught alive? Like I'm imagining you don't want to I'm just thinking from a practical standpoint of if you're catching fish, you're going to want the fish going into your cargo hold or your boat to be as fresh as possible, so you're not you don't leave the net there long enough that you're killing the fish. You want that to happen more or less when it's on the boat, I'm thinking, just as someone who eats fish. I had fish sticks for lunch. Literally. Is it really common? Are there usually not live animals that get bycaught? How does that happen?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what method you're using and then how long you leave the net there. So it can be done where you bring up, an entangled animal alive, but it's often that they are dead. So for example, for sink gillnet fisheries, we call how long a net is in the water is soak time, SOAK, soak. And soak time can be anywhere from a few hours if you're in a really, high fish area to 24 hours or longer. So if a seal gets caught, at hour 5, it's not getting pulled up for another 19 hours and it's gonna drown. There are some kind of scary, crazy videos of I think some huge, it must have been in Alaska, a stellar sea lion dropping on a fishing boat and alive and really angry. But for the most part, in this neck of the woods, if a seal is being bycaught, or if a dolphin or a harbor porpoise is bycaught, for the most part, they're being pulled up dead.
Okay. And I guess that makes sense because the fish also don't need air.
Yeah, I know. And so, like, one of the things I've done was I assisted a research project that was kind of a joint project between the Center for Coastal Studies Marine Fisheries Research Program, which is a really cool organization in Provincetown on Cape Cod, and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is a very illustrious oceanographic institution also in Cape Cod. And they put cameras on gill nets to, the goal was to document seal depredation and bycatch, because we really don't know what the process of how this happens is. So we don't know if there's a couple possibilities. We don't know if a seal comes, swimming by and sees the net and is like, ooh, there's fish in there. I'm going to go eat those fish. And that's called depredation, when, a marine mammal or fish will steal the food from out of a fishing net. And they might go over there and eat the fish and then accidentally get tangled up. And then they either are not strong enough to break out, or they are strong enough to break out and then they have netting around their neck. Or we don't know if maybe they just swim through it because they can't see it. That seems unlikely, but we just don't know. So that was the goal of the project. And they were fishing for skate, mostly winter skate. And the winter skate would get caught, and we watched these videos for hours and hours, and it would be alive when they pulled it up. They would be every once in a while the skate would kind of struggle and try to get out of the net and just tangle itself more. But they would stay alive for a long time. But a seal just it needs air, and they need to come back up, and they're just unable to.
I had no idea that fish nets were down that long. I just assumed maybe a few minutes, but hours on end. I had no idea.
They can be. Yeah, it's different with different fisheries because there's just different methods. But with gill nets, they can just go out one day and put them out, and then come back a day later, a couple days later, because it's just there.
Yeah. I did have a question, and I apologize if this is slightly a tangent, and also if it's not quite your area of expertise, but I want to hear your input on it anyway. What are your thoughts on at least how it relates to the conversation we're having overfishing? Because I keep hearing that more and more as something that we should all be kind of educating ourselves on and looking out for. So in your experiences, what have you kind of seen with regards to that? And I think later on in the episode, I think we're going to get into some solutions about these kinds of things and what we can do. But I just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's probably not 100% my area of expertise. But I will say, from my personal experience, because I also eat seafood, I'm a seafood consumer. I purchase it, I'm supporting this seafood economy. There are regulations put in place for United States fisheries. You could argue with them. Some people don't like them, both fishermen and scientists and conservationists. There's, people have different opinions about them. And there are closures if there's opinions that they do these pretty rigorous stock assessments for each fishery each year. Some of them don't have enough data really to make an assumption. And there are a lot of fisheries that are closed across the country. For the most part, I'd say if you're purchasing a seafood product from the United States, and even better, if you can know what boat it came off of, if you know your fishermen, or if you purchase from a local fish, they have these fishermen co-ops that are fishermen owned, which are really cool. I would say that's the best bet in terms of overfishing. And there's certain seafoods that are definitely better than others. And I think part of that is doing some kind of consumer research. So I believe it's Monterey Bay Aquarium has this thing called Seafood Watch. And really quickly you can look up, if you want to order at a restaurant, you're I don't know, is this good or not? you can look up, what it is, and they'll say it's sustainable, or it's a little iffy, or don't buy it. But I would say in general, I would personally avoid international fisheries, like products from international fisheries, because we just really don't know the regulations that they have, and it's very variable. It's just a little bit more of like the Wild West in terms of overfishing and unsustainable practices. So even though there certainly are U.S. fisheries that, in my opinion, would be considered unsustainable, but I think it's kind of like it's up to you as a consumer to do a little digging.
Thanks. Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I had no idea there was a website too for that, so I'll definitely be looking that one up.
I don't know if this is like jumping ahead too much, but you mentioned one of the reasons why people may not report bycatch is there's just a lot of paperwork. And as someone who, I personally am not a lover of paperwork, as much as I am a scientist, so is there like a way that they're trying to reduce kind of the workload it takes to report these sorts of things? I don't imagine it has to be a complicated process in the sense of you could have just like someone import a tally or something to a website when they're done fishing, just so that you have some number. It's better than nothing, and it's relatively easy.
Yeah, there might be, and maybe I should phrase that it's probably a multitude of factors that are causing the underreporting. There's also a general mistrust of scientists, of maybe the Observer program. There's actually a really great movie that just came out recently called Coda. I think it won an Oscar, and it was set in Gloucester. It was about a fishing family, and there is an observer in it. And she's arguably a bad character. She reports the fishermen are deaf, and she reports them because they're deaf, and she's kind of presented as this like bumbling character, which is probably how a lot of fishermen see observers. And to be fair, these people, fishermen, like really know what they're doing. They've been doing this a long time. And then you have this person that's like, hi, I'm going to be on your boat today, and I'm going to be watching everything you do, and I might report you if you do something wrong, and I don't really know. Some of them, too, are like newer observers, so there's some mistrust and maybe bad blood that's also affecting the reporting, but I'm sure there's ways that it can be streamlined.
I know we've talked about entanglement and bycatch in the case of seals, but are there other marine mammals that this happens to, Jess?
Yes, there are. I probably will default to seals because I've studied seals a lot, and they're a thing I know a lot about. But the kind of like, especially where I am in the Gulf of Maine, the big one with like the neon flashing lights is the North Atlantic right whale. Which you may have heard of, you may not have heard of. If you know anything about marine conservation, you've probably heard something about it. But North Atlantic right whales are a large whale, and they're a baleen whale, and they are the most endangered large whale in the entire world. There's about 350 remaining, and yeah, there's not a lot at all, and they're rapidly declining in number, and a lot of them interact with fisheries. So there was a study that looked at scars on North Atlantic right whales who were alive, so they were alive, but they found that 85% of North Atlantic right whales have been entangled once in their life, while 60% have had multiple entanglements. So it is possible for them to get this entanglement off on their own or to be disentangled, but it's a lot of them get entangled, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't know like too much about whales, but is there something about this kind of whale that like maybe explains why they get entangled a lot?
Yes, there is. So I said it earlier, but they're called they belong to a group called baleen whales. And in the whale, it's a group called cetaceans, includes whales and dolphins. And within the cetacean group, there's mysticetes, which are baleen whales, and odontocetes, which are toothed whales. So baleen whales don't have teeth like we have, but they've got these like long keratin plates that help them filter out krill or very small fish. So other baleen whales include like humpback whales, blue whales, gray whales. There's a lot of them, and they're generally very large. And right whales in particular use a method of filter feeding called ram filtration. So what they do is they open up their huge mouth and they just swim at either right at the surface or a little bit in the water column for miles all day long, because they're feeding on these teeny tiny little zooplankton called copepods, which are just like tiny little microorganisms. And they're really big whales, so they need to eat a lot of them to stay big and stay fat and stay healthy. So they just have their mouths open all day long, swimming around. And unfortunately, if they're in an area with a lot of fisheries, which the Gulf of Maine has, there's a lot of rope in the water column. So with any nets or pots or traps, whatever, they have a rope that will attach to a buoy at the surface, and so that's how the fisherman knows, oh, that's my buoy, that's my trap, I'm going to pull it up. And the right whales, because their mouths are open like all the time, they just swim right through the rope, and it gets caught in their mouths. It can displace their baleen. It causes a lot of drag because they can carry the pots with them. So yeah, they're carrying rope, they've got a buoy, they've got pots that are dragging behind them. So they're expending more energy just to go where they would usually go. And then sometimes it disrupts their feeding. So sometimes they're not able to feed while they're expending more energy carrying all this gear along. So it's a common way that an entangled right whale will die is by starvation.
Oh, I see.
So
yeah, that was not like when we were speaking about like entanglement, that was not like the way that I thought a whale would be entangled.
It's different for different types of whales. Like humpback whales can also get entangled in this way. They have a different kind of feeding where they kind of lunge. So they don't have their mouths open like 24/7 almost like right whales do. So they don't get entangled quite as much. And also, the humpback whale population is a lot healthier than the North Atlantic right whale population. So when, like, one North Atlantic right whale, dies of an entanglement, that's a really big deal because there's not many left at all.
Why are there so few North Atlantic right whales to begin with?
So they are called right whales from back in the whaling days. They were literally the right whales to kill. They're very fat and very buoyant, and they just hang out at the surface, and they're really slow, and like I said, they just cruise with their mouths open all day. They don't need to be fast. Their prey are copepods, which are not going anywhere, and so they just sit at the surface really slowly. So if you're a whaling ship that started in the in what is now North America as early as the 1300s, you will see that and you're like, that's a really easy whale to harpoon because it's right there, it's not going anywhere. They don't really dive down like a humpback whale might, and they were just killed in large numbers. They also had a lot of blubber because they're highly they're just high in blubber, and so that was used for lamps and candles. And they had a lot of baleen, which was used for other products like even like corsets. Like the ribbing in a corset used to be baleen, which is interesting. Back in the day. So they were already almost decimated heading into, I think, the 20th century. So they've entered the modern era already on a bad foot. So everything else just kind of piled up on top.
Yeah. And I guess it's kind of tough because here we have, the fishing industries and the fisheries, trying to catch fish to, sell to people. But then you also have, the right whales that need to eat, the phytoplankton? Zooplankton, that are, kind of also in the same area. And, I guess it's, two species just trying to make a livelihood. So I was kind of, so it's, kind of this, big seesaw is what I'm imagining it. And I'm curious, like, are people like kind of actively trying to like maybe place fisheries in like another location so that right whales don't swim into the ropes as much? Is that like possible, or like the best locations, like the most optimal fishing locations are just like where the right whales happen to be?
Yeah, there are seasonal closures in certain areas in New England. So, for example, Cape Cod Bay is closed, I believe, in the winter time for lobster fishing because there's a lot of North Atlantic right whales in Cape Cod Bay in the winter because there's just high copepod aggregations. It's difficult with the placement of the lobster pots. I learned something really cool recently. This idea of lobster ranching or lobster farming. So the way lobster pots work is that for the most part, lobsters can get out, even like the big ones. I mean, I guess if they're huge, they can't get out. But for the most part, the lobsters can get out. So they put these pots down that have bait in them to attract the lobsters. And some of the lobsters will come and eat the bait, and then they leave. And they get a little bit fatter, a little bit bigger. And then, these typically lobstermen will stay in the same areas, and it's kind of territorial. And so then they put the pot down again, and the lobsters come in and eat the bait and leave. And whatever they pull up, like sometimes whatever they get in the pot when they pull it up is just what happened to be there at the time. It wasn't really trapped in there. It just happened to be there eating the bait at that time. So this idea of lobster ranching is that you're actually feeding the lobsters and making them bigger, making them fatter, and using your money and your bait to fatten them up. And so when you eventually catch them, you invested time and money and energy into the lobsters, even if you couldn't really see it happening. And so for some, these lobster territories were like passed down from generation to generation. So it's really difficult to say, okay, you just go move your pot, because they have been there for a long time, and there is this kind of idea that I've been feeding these lobsters and they're my lobsters, and when they're ready to be pulled up, or when I happen to pull them up, like that's mine. It can't be someone else's. And so that's another issue. It's hard to just tell them to move.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially if it's been something for years and years in a family over generations.
Yeah, and I like what you said about like this seesaw of struggle, because beyond even just entanglement and bycatch and the restrictions placed on fishermen, there's a lot of threats to the like local small scale fishing industry that as we know it. Like one of them is gentrification. A lot of these working class towns that used to be fishing towns, Gloucester, Provincetown on Cape Cod, they are being gentrified. It's harder and harder to live there, but there are people that still are fishing out of there, and if you can't make a living to support yourself where you are, you're not going to be able to fish. If you can't live nearby, how can you fish out of there? So there's already like all these threats to these small scale industries that would truly be really a loss to like New England culture. Think about like lobster in the summertime, like that. If you've been to New England, if you've been to Maine, if you've been to Massachusetts, like that's New England culture. And so it will be a huge loss both for these fishing families that have been around for a long time, and that's really all they've ever done, and to the culture of New England.
Yeah, and I think like that sounds kind of perhaps hyperbolic if you're not from New England, although all of us on this call are, so maybe I'm making things up. But like my family, like I grew up, like my family, my grandparents have a house on an island in Maine, and like every 4th of July we'd have a clam bake, and clams in the name, but there were lobster, there was like that is very much a cultural thing. Like that's something that like I recognized once I moved out, and like that's something that's like cultural to me. And so like the idea of losing that is actually alarming to me. Like I'm sitting here thinking, that would be a bad thing to lose, especially because as far as I'm aware and how I've heard it, like lobster is a relatively sustainable fishery in terms of the actual lobsters themselves. So the idea of losing that thing that is a part of, I guess, my culture is it's a hard thing to grapple with. Yeah, even with the gentrification angle, like, that's upsetting.
And it's culturally important, but I with lobsters especially, I can't emphasize enough how economically important it is. So I've heard different things. I've heard from some people that lobster is the most lucrative fishery in the entire United States. And if you're not from New England, the lobster that we're talking about is American lobster. It's the lobster that turns red when you boil it. There's other types of lobster, like Caribbean spiny lobster, and you just eat the tail of that. We're not talking about those. We're talking about American lobster that's really, especially nowadays, only found in New England and Canada. And so it's very localized to this region, and it is prized in places all over the country and all over the world. So lobster and scallop are two of the most lucrative fisheries, and I think it kind of flip-flops between the two. But just also from an economic perspective, if you just got rid of that fish or said, nope, we're not doing that anymore, that would, like, for Maine especially, that would just, oh my goodness, that would, like, cripple the economy.
I'm still thinking about, like, you know, the right whales and, like, I guess endangered and threatened species in general. Like, I'm wondering if there's anything that, you know, people like us can do who are outside these industries or the general public. Is there anything that we can do to try to make the situation better?
I think paying attention, for one. Like, don't put on your blinders and be like, oh, this is too sad, I can't, deal with this. Paying attention. I think there are lots of people working on technologies that might help protect North Atlantic right whales that don't involve closing down the lobster fishery. And so, some of them include, they're called ropeless gear, which just means there is rope involved. It's a little bit of a bad name, but it just means that there's no rope in the water column. So they don't have that like long stretch of rope that the right whales just like get caught in their mouths. And their GPS, typically they have like a GPS modem or something on it that will alert like the lobster boat, oh, this is where my pod is. And they've got different technologies where in theory you press a button and either like a balloon inflates and it just comes up, or there's a spool with the rope and a buoy, and then when you press the button the spool unfurls and rises to the surface. Mm-hmm. So there are these technologies that they're testing, but the downsides is that they're really expensive right now. We don't really know how well they work, and so that's why they're in testing. But one thing that might help is if lawmakers would support funding for these pots as alternatives to the traditional lobster pot with a line. So, I mean, one thing you could do is contact your local lawmaker, whether that's a congressman or a senator or whatever, and, talk about how you are concerned about North Atlantic right whales, but you want to keep the lobster industry, and that you think they should support legislation that will fund these experimental projects and maybe have grants and subsidies for, say we find that the one with the balloon works really well and it's awesome, but still really expensive. So supporting grants and subsidies for lobstermen to be able to purchase them without spending their own money, because it's already a very expensive thing to do, to go out and fish. You have to pay a crew, you have, your fuel, the cost of the traps is substantial, and to have like a fancy, like, highly technological trap would probably be really expensive. So supporting those kind of government supported infrastructure, I think would really help in general, and also would help with fishermen support for a lot of these new ideas, because in a lot of ways fishermen are used to doing things the way they've been done, and so there's some hesitation to try out these new things, because it's like, well, what if they don't work and then I lose out on my catch? So if the government could support, whether it's the state or the federal government, support that monetarily, maybe that could change some minds.
Yeah, and this makes me hopeful from what you've described, because like, I don't know, it sounds like technology could be the way, new innovations, like people thinking of creative solutions that would not damage like marine mammals but still preserve like the industry. So that and all like makes me hopeful. But yeah, there is like the like financial challenge that you mentioned. And I guess like on that side, I'm kind of curious about any other technological innovations. So I know we were talking a little bit about like the seals getting entangled in bycaught, and so are scientists and fishermen like thinking of ways to make those incidences less common?
Yeah, there's lots of people. So, like I said, the team that I worked on, that I mean, really, I just got to assist with. It was not my project, but that was putting cameras on gill nets. It's really step one. We have to understand how it happens before we can try to stop it. So there are teams working on understanding the problem better, and then in theory, then having new ideas for how to fix it. In other parts of the world, there's these things called like seal exclusion devices for like sea lions or for seals. But that really works with like trawls, where you have a net that you're towing behind a boat where it's actively moving. And in that situation, you have, if the seal accidentally enters the trawl, there's a little escape, basically like an escape door that somehow only a seal can get through. I don't quite understand how it works. But that doesn't really work here in New England for the gillnet fisheries, because it's just staying on the bottom. It's not moving, and it's just a pain. It's like a flat, it's just a flat piece of net that's out. It's not a circle. It's not something where they're getting caught in that way. Currently, there are these things called pingers. Pingers, I don't know if I said that clearly, but they just are these little devices that you attach to the net. And they make sound. So a while ago, again, also I think before my time, harbor porpoise, which is a type of cetacean. It kind of just looks like a really small dolphin. They're very cute. They were getting bycaught a lot in nets in New England. And so they started using these pingers, and it actually found to really work. It seemed like the porpoises were just unaware that the nets were there, and it was kind of accidental. And with the pingers, the rate of harbor porpoise bycatch has gone, down a lot. So that was really great. So they still put these pingers out, and they also seem to work for dolphins as well. But they put out these pingers on these gill nets. It's like awesome. It's working great, and some fishermen claim that it acts like a dinner bell for seals. So while it, will keep harbor porpoises away and dolphins away, the seals hear it, according to, we don't know for certain, but the seals may hear it and go, ooh, that's a net, and that's got fish in it, which means an easy meal for me. And so they swim on over, and they eat out of the nets, which again is called depredation, which is a pretty big problem for fishermen. And either they swim away, or maybe they then get bycaught because, again, they're playing around with the nets or entangled. So there are technologies, and there are, that's kind of an older technology. They are working on new deterrents, which is what, anything to keep these animals away from the nets. There's just not much currently in use right now besides the pingers.
I wonder if, and maybe this is, I'm sure this has been thought of already, but I don't know if you know anything about it, because I know it's decently common, especially for endangered marine mammals, to try to track them. So I don't know if any tracking technology has been used in conjunction with the technology that you mentioned in order to try to avoid the exact areas that the animals are in.
Yeah, there has been some tracking that has been done. It's so expensive.
Yeah.
And then you also have to, with the seal, you have to sedate it and capture it and apply tags and all this stuff. The thing about seals is that it's be difficult just to avoid the area they're in, because they are highly, highly mobile. They go very far distances all over the place. So there are some tag data that shows juvenile, I think it was harbor seals, that were released on Cape Cod. And they went around, one of them went down to Rhode Island and then went back to Cape Cod and then went up to Maine and then went up to Canada and then went to Sable Island, which is an island that's even further off Canada, and then like back to Canada and back to Maine, all in like 30 days or something.
Oh my goodness.
So
Wow.
so the idea that seals are just in this one place is kind of silly. They're really not. So even like, you know, we share our population with Canadian seals. They are one group, because with gray seals especially, they are just one big group, because they don't see borders. Like, they're not like, oh, this is the US-Canada border, I should turn around now because I'm a US seal. Like, they don't do that.
Oh, I forgot my passport. Oh no.
Yeah, I don't have my birth certificate. Oh darn, gotta go back. No, they just like, oh, fish are up there, I'm going there. So it's really hard to say. If you follow that logic, you'd have to like just shut down fisheries everywhere, because they're kind of everywhere.
I had no idea their range was so extensive.
Yeah, that's pretty far.
They move a lot.
They are really impressive animals, and that was a juvenile, so that was
Right.
not even an adult. I did a project looking at harbor seal stomach contents, and these were stranded harbor seals, which means that they washed up dead. And then we looked into their stomachs and we're like, what is in here? And there was one that was a juvenile, and it stranded a few days later, and it did not die of it was not a human-caused death, and it was not like an injury death, so there was something, you know, it probably had an infection or some kind of disease or something. And while, like, you know, a few days probably before death, it managed to go out to the continental shelf and eat a type of squid that's only found off the continental shelf, and then come back. So, and then die. So they are highly, highly mobile. I think that, like, they're pretty small. I mean, compared to a whale, they're pretty small. And they probably don't get enough credit for being as, like, all over the place as they are.
They're all over the place. I don't know if we established this, but are they endangered or...
So they are not endangered. So there's two species. I probably should have given the rundown in the beginning, but there's two species that are year-round residents in New England. It's the harbor seal and the gray seal. Neither are considered endangered. I don't have the exact numbers on how many there are, but gray seals have a very healthy population in Canada. And like I said, not all the Canadian seals come down to New England, but a good amount do. And we have a breeding population here as well. They are not endangered. They were bounty hunted to extirpation in the late 1800s, which basically means that they were gone in this region, regionally extinct. Gray seals were extirpated because Maine and Massachusetts in the 1800s saw a decline in their fish. And instead of looking at overfishing or anything else, they were like, you know what? We think it's the seals. It's definitely the seals eating the fish, and so we'll just kill them. So they had these bounty hunts where you could kill a seal, cut off its nose, or some places say flippers, but most old-timey newspapers I've seen were nose, and bring it to town hall, and then you'll get something like 5 cents. And so they did a really good job killing the seals, and the gray seals were just gone from this area, and harbor seals persisted in very small numbers. And only recently, in the 90s, did gray seals really begin to return. So they begin to return from Canada, and then they begin to repopulate historic breeding sites, which is kind of cool because these seals were not born in the United States, so how did they know to go to the places that 200 years ago seals were going to breed? But those include off Cape Cod, like Monomoy and Muskeget Islands. They also include a few islands off of Maine for gray seals. So they are not endangered. They've done a pretty good job of repopulating, which is great. But because of that, they don't really get a lot of attention or funding, which I think is a little bit of a shame because in 2020, gray seals were declared by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to be the most bycaught marine mammal in the United States, which means out of the entire U.S., Hawaii and Alaska, gray seals are being killed in nets the most. And another caveat on top of that is that that's only the number that the observers are reporting. So remember, we said there's probably more being killed that we don't even know about. So they're not endangered, so they don't really get the same attention or funding or any of it that an endangered species would get. And rightfully so. Like, I think endangered species need the attention and the money to be able to protect them. But I think when we as humans are affecting a population to the point that they are the most, killed in nets in the entire country, like, I think that deserves a little bit of attention and a little bit of, awareness. But it just hasn't really happened yet.
Yeah. I was going to ask about, like, I think you raise a good point with if gray seals are the most killed in the U.S., sure, it may not be an active problem now, right? It may not be as concerning as the right whale becoming closer to extinction. But I think, if the right whale becomes extinct and then the gray seals become more threatened, if we do lose those animals from the community, there's going to be food chain effects, right? And that those would also affect us. So there would be those secondary effects that I think we don't really think about all the time. And so I just wanted to hear your expertise on that. Like, what effects could we see? And because these are things that I think we should all be thinking about.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because I think some people see like whales and dolphins and seals as just like really cool and cute. And it's like, oh my God, like, you see a seal, come on, you see a seal and you're like, that's so cute. Yeah. Or you see a whale on a whale watch and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, it's just exciting. They're what we call charismatic megafauna. In the like marine science world, I get a little teased for studying charismatic megafauna from like the crab people or like the snail people. But they're really, really, really important. So they, a lot of them are mesopredators. So that's what seals are, which means that they're not the top of the food chain, but they eat a lot of things. So they eat a lot of fish, they eat squid, they eat a lot of different things. So they're really, really important nutrient cyclers. So they, consume food and then they, will go poop somewhere and it fertilizes. And the same with whales. Whales are really, really important nutrient cyclers, especially ones that feed like closer to the bottom and then come up and poop. They like fertilize the entire water column, which is really, really important for, we have the plankton that are there and the fish that eat the plankton and the fish that eat the fish and then the seals that eat the fish and then the sharks that eat the seals. So they play a really important role in the ecosystem. And there's actually some people trying to determine like the economic benefit for each individual marine mammal. So there's one, I cannot remember off the top of my head, but there's one that scientists that looked at the economic benefit of like one humpback whale. And it was something in the range, I'm totally guessing off the top of my head or remembering, but it was something in the range of like $1 million. From nutrient cycling, from tourism, people that go to see whales, from all these benefits. And so as a part of that, whales, dolphins, pinnipeds, all of these marine mammals are federally protected, which is why also it's kind of a big issue because these are federally protected animals. But in 1973, the Marine Mammal Protection Act was passed. And it's a really kind of cool piece of legislation because it was the first law that used ecosystem-based management as their approach to the protection of these marine mammals. So they were not protected because they're really cute or they're just like really cool. They were protected because scientists recognized the ecosystem benefits that they provided. And if they didn't protect them, they were worried that there was going to be large numbers of them gone, which would then result in weaker ecosystems, worse fisheries, which then affects the economy. So it's really a groundbreaking piece of legislation. And so since then, marine mammals have been protected. But again, it's not because they're cute. It's because they are cute, but they're also really important.
Thank you, Jess, for coming on the show. That was really interesting. It was great to just kind of reminisce about fish for a second there for me, which is a very strange sentence, but it was definitely a good time. This was very interesting conversation. I know I learned a lot.
Jess, is there any like final words or take-home messages that you'd like our listeners to take away?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun nerding out with old high school friends and Sarah.
Sarah.
New friends.
New friends, old friends,
yeah.
And new friends. But yeah, my big take-home message is I kind of talked about it a lot, but I think we need to pay attention when humans are causing a problem in the ocean, or in the world, really. I think we need to pay attention. And I think with collaboration, communication between scientists and fishermen and conservationists, between these groups, like, we can come to solutions that work for everyone. I don't believe in a solution that will hurt one group. I think that it's 2022. Like, we're all pretty brilliant. We have a lot of amazing technology. Like, we can figure this out. So my take message, we can coexist. We gotta work together, which I'm hopeful that we can do.
Yeah, and I mean, that is kind of the goal of this project too, the Interactome as a whole. This is our 10th episode, actually, so that's really exciting. And if you want to kind of learn more about science and how people are interacting with each other and collaborating to solve the complicated problems that we're facing today, first off, I encourage you to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm assuming you know how to find podcasts as you're listening to one. So you can also follow us on social media. On Twitter, we are at the Interactome. On Instagram, we are interactome_media, and you can also follow us on Facebook and go to our website at interactomedia.org. So thanks for listening, and hopefully tune in next time. We release episodes hopefully every third Monday of the month. So tune in a month and see what we've got going then.